Welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thanks for tuning in today's show. This podcast is dedicated to individuals and professionals who desire to learn more about the subject of health and wellness, as well as alternative technologies to better health and vitality. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thanks for tuning in today. My guest today is Martin Historf. Martin is an entrepreneur, author, inspirational speaker, and personal bliss coach. He also is a thought leader and subject matter expert in holistic well-being. He helps successful men in midlife crises to gain lasting fulfillment, to eliminate the suffering in their lives, and to cultivate a permanent state of total well-being without the need to achieve or get more. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be a guest and share my knowledge with the audience.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today. After meeting you and having a conversation last week, I just became extremely intrigued with what you do and how you got there. And I've been on your website. I've read your material, a lot of your material, and I'm excited to have this conversation today. So welcome again. Let's just start real simple. Let's talk a little bit about your story, your journey, maybe from when you came to this country. If I remember correctly, you're from Bulgaria. Is that correct?
Yes, I was born and grew up in Bulgaria, came to the US right after graduating high school. I had a great opportunity.
Well, tell us a little bit about that and how your life has kind of taken shape over the past few years that has brought you to the place you are today.
Sure. Well, it's a long story, but I'm going to try to provide enough context so it makes sense, because it's all one thing we all need to understand, that the reality we take for granted and think or perceive as reality, it's not really a reality. It's all in contrast and it's all relative too. We always have to have something relative to or to compare, whether it's our sense of perception or the way we think, right? Like space only exists when we have objects in empty space to say, oh, there's space between the objects, or darkness exists because there is light, and so on. It's always relative. So I need to add some context to really give you the audience some good idea. But like we have and why I'm saying this is that because where I grew up in my childhood, how I've in my experience here and in being in the US for half my life now, at going 19 years, is like it's comparing black to white. There's such a great contrast. It's absolutely it's very hard to compare both, but to give you a perspective of how I was brought up and who I was before and who I am today, so you can get an idea of how much transformation I've been through in my journey so far. Is I grew up in an environment where we had communism, and I was a little kid, so it was a very weird world, so to speak. It's like my country in modern terms at those days was considered like a third world country, because we were not part of Russia, but Russia had great influence over that part of the world after the Second World War. However, early on, I think it was like the late 80s and early 90s when communism fell apart, and there was like this very I wouldn't call it utopic, but a very wild west sort of version of democracy. And we as kids growing up in that environment had full freedom to do whatever we wanted to do, like zero adult supervision and so on, and restrictions in how we were live our lives. So what kids do, they look up to grown-ups, what they do, and they want to do the same. So we smoked cigarettes, we drink alcohol, we gambled, and I'm talking, we were 7 years old. This is not like I'm in my teenage years. I'm talking like a little child doing this almost like daily on a weekly basis, right? And not because we enjoyed it, it's just like what the grown-ups do. So we wanted to copy the grown-ups, or not necessarily copy, just wanted to be cool.
Yeah, it was your
So
environment.
yeah, it was just the environment having the effects on us, and we being young children, like all children, basically, they don't do what you tell them to do. They do what you do, and they copy it, because that's how we all wired to learn. It's called mirror neurons in the brain. So we always see and copy things, especially in early age. So this is a very important point for all parents or somebody who's a figure that young children look up to be aware of your behavior, not what you say, but how you behave in front of the kids, because that's going to impact them the most. But to continue on my story, then eventually we went through high school and all these things. So in early age, I had the opportunity to, like, in many ways, satiate all these desires that young men up to their 30s have in very early age, because we just had access to it. It was no restriction by age or money. You know, if you had money, people will hand you anything you want. Maybe they'll ask you, who is this for? And we'll say, oh, my dad or my mom or whatever. But that was it. Case closed. So we got what we wanted. So I arrived in the US, and I lived, from all places, in Vegas, and was exposed to my first kind of like contact with the Western world, really, because before that I would just see things on movies and so on, right? And movies, as we all know, are very far from reality.
From reality. Yeah, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, right?
Well, I hope so. I hope so, to say, you never know. But point being, you're exposed to this whole different world. And I also have ability, or the opportunity there, to be very immersed in what I would call the material and kind of like world of desires, right? Like whether it was, restaurants, bars, and whatever, nightclubs, and all these things as a young man. So I really immersed myself and make the most out of this experience. But very early on, I realized that what I was doing at the moment, even though for many people in my position at that early age would have been great. I had a real estate license. The market was booming. I was also a bartender in a nightclub. So I was making bang, but I was just not feeling fulfilled. It wasn't giving me any, I was doing these things. I had these toys, but at the same time, it's like, nah, I don't feel like this is enough. Like what's going on here, right? So I decided to throw it all in the sink and just move to Orlando or in Florida to go and pursue this music career. So it was just from I felt like a passion for music. So I went to Orlando, studied, and so on. And all along those ways, right, being exposed to these things, having the opportunity to taste the forbidden fruit, to use those terms, right? I've noticed that, and I've been noticing this from very early age. It wasn't something new. I was always asking deeper questions. I was always looking for the why of things, the causality. I wasn't really interested in what's on the surface. I really wanted to know what's making things the way they are in the behind the scenes kind of deal. So I was always asking questions, and I realized that majority of the grown-ups first are very hypocritical. They say one thing, then they do a whole different thing altogether. And then they have no clear why or knowing of why they do certain things or why certain things are the way they are. They had no explanation. And I always been driven by this why thing, sort of always seeking from within a deeper, meaningful things. And that's what really drove me on my journey, and what really clicked for me was reading a very powerful book that I highly recommend for everybody to pick up and read, especially if you live in the Western world. This is probably the Bible to politics, social relationships, and anything you can think of, business and so on. The book is called Propaganda by Edward Bernays. He actually happens to be the nephew of Sigmund Freud, which is one of the fathers of modern psychology. So this guy in this book talks about how he himself was the one responsible and instrumental behind a lot of political movements, and meaning like manipulation on a mass scale of certain to implant or propagate into people's consciousness certain ideas, selling products that they don't need, and all these other things to basically influence the masses on such a level where they didn't even understand. And we live in the society, like if you follow the book and look at all the examples, because he speaks in the book from direct examples that he did and what they did in society, right? It's not just theoretical. No, he was the one who was hired to do these things. He was the one who instrumented these movements.
So it sounds like he's the one that got the subliminal type things in movies, in the clips that you see before a movie starts where they're trying to sell you products. So you'll see these really quick blips of food and candy and drinks and all that.
Not necessarily with this. It was all more like what one would call social engineering.
Okay. Well,
how to steer the masses based through the information you disseminate and who to use to instrument certain things. I'd highly recommend the book. It's not a big book, but what you're gonna find out is that the world we live in today is completely manufactured out of thin air. None of it has any validity. None of it. It has a lot of validity for like, let's put it this way, entities that you can count on your fingers that have a lot of great economical agenda. But outside of that, none of it has any validity. If you put it to the test, you will fail any rational and logical test. So I highly recommend the audience to really look into this book with a very open mind and then see how this has transferred or kind of like evolved through the years to get us to where we had 2023 in the Western world, where we all consumers, basically. We're not human beings any longer. We're seen as consumers, and the key is let's consume more so we can eventually bring this planet to its collapse, because we cannot satiate our nonsense desires.
But that makes a lot of sense, Martin. It really does. So continue on with your journey. I mean, because now that you've had these thought processes and you're seeing certain things, what brought you to the point now where you see some of the top challenges that men face in our world today?
Well, my own challenges, to be honest, like the challenges that I went through and I was exposed to, because as I already alluded earlier in my story, I grew up very quickly in a sense of like the environment I was exposed to, the things I was doing. So when I was 18, I would probably be in the mindset, the experience I have, real world experience, not experience from reading books or watching movies of a 28 years man in the Western world. Right. So my grow up was very accelerated. So the challenges I faced first was like, the main one was I was lacking fulfillment, or like a sustained sense or perpetual state of fulfillment, or just feeling like happy with the things I had done or the way my life was. I realized that I was caught up in a feedback loop that was always like, what's next? What's next? I'm going to achieve this. I'm going to get this. I'm going to achieve this. And I'm going to get this. And I achieve this and get this and check mark the list. And still, this feeling that I was seeking, it was always fleeting or not anywhere close.
I can relate to that a lot. Yeah.
So I was starting to ask different questions. What I caught myself really into is that at this point, I had so much self-awareness just being maybe being a single child. I'm a single child, so I have no siblings, and I had through the years, especially since I had no adult supervision, and most of my days was spent just by myself. I had to entertain myself, and not that I didn't have friends, but a lot of those hours, some of them were spent by myself, even making my own breakfast or whatever it was. But point being, I was used to being with myself, with my thoughts, and really looking them like from a very objective perspective, right? Where I can sit down with myself and have these like deep moments of reflection. And one thing I caught myself was like, even before I achieved this thing, when I knew it's like around the corner, I'm gonna get there, I was already like, oh, what's next? What's next? So I was like, I realized that I was running this pattern. Like I was always looking for something outside of me to make me feel something within myself. It just didn't make sense. So I was like, well, this haven't worked so far. It's not like I have not achieved enough or I don't have enough. It's none of those. Basically, this doesn't work because if I continue to repeat the things, I will continue to get the same results. So I'm not an insane person. I'm an intelligent guy. What's not working here, right? And this has to do with how we are being conditioned through society, through this mass level propaganda, to think that pursuing externalities will make us be happy or like joyful, really on a deep level where it's permanent state. It's not something fleeting. And so I started this really created, I've always been curious about a lot of subjects, but it created curiosities within me about what one in the mainstream person would consider fringe things, right? Fringe knowledge or whatever, like whether it's spirituality, whether it's esoterics or any of those like teachings that are not mainstream, that have been propagated through the centuries to humanity to give all of us tools to navigate our lives better and have better lives and be better human beings, right, along the process. So I started to experiment. I'm a very pragmatic guy. I don't like to just, even though I have this nice background with the books and all that, and I love reading and watching documentaries and always expanding my mind with different ideas and so on, I started to really experiment with all these tools because it's great to read ideas in a book, but unless you put them into practice to see what results they deliver, good luck. It's kind of like having the best recipe book in the world that all the top level chefs in the world kind of like put each one of them, put one recipe for you there, and you're just satisfied with that. It never like really cook those meals to taste them and enjoy. Right. So I'm like always, I had to try things, and I've been experimenting with things, and I'm still experimenting with things as we go, because as you journey unfolds, as you grow as a soul having a human experience, because that's what we truly are in our essence, and you have a direct experience of this, which is the most amazing life transformation one can have. But I'll go to this, I'll unpack this a little bit deeper later in our conversation. Like you become even more curious because you realize that the more you know,
the more you want to know.
Not just no, the more you learn, the more you realize how ignorant you are about a lot of things. We take a lot of things for granted.
Yes, we do.
Think that by knowing how to name something with one word, for example, fire, we know what fire is. Well, I'm going to tell you, fire is a very complex process. There are about 80 different compounds that are created and involved in it. And if you think you just know what fire is by knowing how to name it, you are living in Disneyland. Like how you recommended to just watch a documentary, for example, on fire, on what really creates fire, what fires is, how it works, and so on and so on. But point being, the more you learn, the more you realize how ignorant you are, and it makes you humble. You no longer have this like fake face of like, oh, I know everything. You start to realize that actually you know very little. So there is so much more to learn. Obviously, we cannot learn all the information in the world, but if we have a certain problem, and that's what is unique about us men, we are problem solvers. Our brains are wired to seek to solve problems. That's just how we operate. So if with my problem was, and I would say that I've had many problems, but the most like persistent problem was this lack of like permanent state of joy and happiness. That was my biggest problem. Like I wanted to find a state where I no longer need like feel like I'm lacking something. I want something. I'm propelled by these fleeting desires to navigate my life. So that really drove my journey and drove me to be where I am today. Just going down the rabbit hole, anything that I resonate with whether it's methodology, philosophy, any of those things, just experimenting, seeing what results they create. And I speak from experience. It's all based on experience. I don't speak from theory. Theory is, for me, it has value as to open your mind if you have an open mind.
Right.
But outside of that, as Einstein many years ago said, theory and practice are very different things.
Yeah, I was reading some information on you that said a lot of people describe you as a modern mystic, a yogi, a biohacker, philosopher, eccentric scholar, polymath, and a maverick. And then the last statement I read was, and he fervently walks his talk daily. So that's a pretty big statement for someone to say. But and that's as we have this conversation, first of all, I want to back up. You said you went to Orlando and got involved in music. My background is in music. I was a 30-year teacher as an educator in music, taught little kids how to play musical instruments and musical theory and history and stuff like that. So that was my passion for many years. But I also found that at times it wasn't a fulfilling thing because it had this cyclical process to it, year in and year out, doing the same thing. And so I understand some of the things you've been talking about as being, because I'm quite a bit older than you. And so I've been through a little different variation of life. And still at this stage of life, I'm 66. I still found myself looking for that fulfillment. Has nothing to do with money or whatever anybody terms to be success. I think that all comes in different packages. As you said earlier, it's relative to what's around us. But what do you think some of the biggest challenges men face today? I think you've touched on that a little bit, but let's expand on that a little bit more.
Well, I would say first, we can talk about men. Like, I think we need to break it down from like different age groups because we're all men, but
right.
Your specific challenges are different from, let's say, from a 20-year young man or a 7-year-old boy growing up in school. And I think the main problem, first and foremost, and I mean this is like across the board, and that's where really the main problem starts, is we no longer have a society that have a positive idea about what men bring to the table, what are the positive qualities and values of men. I mean, in this Western world with this, what I call toxic feminism, men are seen as like past tense. However, the world we exist in nowadays, in one way or another, is based on all the labor and hard-breaking work that men did. And yeah, you can say women, they definitely do things. Absolutely, credit given, carrying children and so on and so on. But who works in mines, even nowadays? So society in general lacks great examples of what men should be. And that's where the fundamental problem begins in early childhood, because the people that children look up to initially are their parents, right? However, the parents nowadays, I'm sure you grew up in a different world where men were viewed in a very different way. But nowadays, men are viewed like looked down upon just because being men. It's like almost like it's like we've become a second-class citizens. Like there's something wrong to be men and to have masculine traits and use them, because if Mother Nature, or the divine, or whatever label you want to use, didn't, in its infinite intelligence, determine that it makes sense for there to be two genders, because clearly they have different functions, and evolutionary biology and brain development and so on proves this on a scientific level, hands down. We are absolutely different. The only common thing is that we breathe, talk, speak, and kind of like move in similar ways, but that's where the similarities ends. There's nothing common between men and women, and hence why my book is directed to men, because I can only speak from experience as a man in a male body. I don't know that I'm sure the great challenges that women face that we have no understanding. Same on their end. They have no understanding about the challenges a mother has, no understanding of what's going on in his little child body. Hence, we all as men need great examples to look up to. And if you look at popular media, like, who are kids looking up to nowadays, to begin with the younger generation, right? Right. Rappers and all these, like, there's nothing wrong with rap, but the example they give is very, very toxic. It's negative. It has no positivity in it. And what do you see on TV? Violence. Negative. Violence, fear, violence, negativity, hatred, division, separation. Well, if you're conditioning these kids from early childhood, I don't care where they live across the globe, with this mindset, they're obviously gonna turn out to be very damaged human beings that need a lot of self-work, healing, love, and so on, to come to terms with first who and what they are in their biology and so on, and then to actually become citizens, global citizens that actually benefit the world by being themselves and giving their gifts and so on. So I think this is one of the major problems that we lack, because kids and everybody else, right? We need an environment. If you lack the environment, to give an example, environment trumps will over time, all of the time. If
say that one more time, Martin.
Environment trumps will over time, all of the time. So environment is critical, whether you're a young child, whether you're a young man or a teenager, or whether you're an older man, doesn't matter how old you are, your environment is going to have a significant effect on you. And environment has to do with your friends, your family, the media that you're consuming on a daily basis, and so on, because all these things subconsciously are programming you, are conditioning your subconscious brain to think, see, feel, and do certain things in a certain way.
Right.
And
as an educator, my comments to my kids was always, you become what your environment is. And if your environment is toxic, or if your environment is always in a negative thought process of people you're around, the way they treat you, the way they talk to you, etc., you're going to be just like that. However, if you change that environment, you put yourself into that positive environment, it's going to treat you that way. And that's a very simplistic thought process. But after 60 some years of that, and seeing what I see as an educator and have seen for all these years, I see those different environments having those different impacts on kids. And then, like you're saying, pretty much everything in our Western culture today spends its time in fear and negativity, and always tearing down the human soul. And that's where we as men, we've lost the backbone. We've lost the ability to stand up for ourselves, because we've been beaten up so many times from so many different angles. And I really like some of the things that you're saying, Martin. Now, let me ask you this question. Based on what you're sharing with us, is this how you kind of develop that holistic well-being that you have talked about? And when I've looked on your website, and your book is going to be addressing a lot of that, I think. Talk a little bit about the holistic well-being as a young man, and what you see that we as men need to be doing.
Well, why holistic? Because again, Holistic has to do with being whole. That's really what holistic means. If somebody is not understanding what the word holistic means, because there are many definitions, but that's what I use that word or chose that word, because it means whole.
Right.
And unless you're whole, to give you another example, if you're a bottle of water and you have holes all over you, at the end of the day, you got nothing left because you spilled it all over. So you need to become whole or wholesome, or in a sense, fill all these holes that are leaking your energy, leaking your vitality, leaking your intelligence, leaking your creativity, leaking your emotional stability, your peace in all these places, because it's like you have... To use another analogy, it's like you are a cattle farmer or whatever it is, and you just let your cattle just roam without having any boundaries, control, doors, or any ways to like keep them constrained in some certain area and space. So they can roam free, but they still, generally speaking, they're not free because they're within a controlled parameter that you actually have control over. So this is really what holistic is. And how I stumbled upon it is, again, by being curious and exploring all these different rabbit holes, because ever since my early childhood, I think I was 16, maybe 15 years old when I started going to the gym and pumping iron and doing all these things. And that was cool. But I was eating shit. Like I was smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, and all these things, so which I know were not great for me. So eventually, my friend Steffi, which I'm truly grateful for, that she's a good friend of mine, exposed me to, because she was very healthy in the way she ate, and she did yoga and these things, and she's much older than me. But point being, like from her, all of a sudden, some moment things struck. I was like, well, I'm eating all this garbage. If this is my body and I treat it like a garbage can, well, eventually it's going to start to stink.
Yeah.
to use a simple analogy. So the first change was I addressed that. I did so, and I started to see immediately different results. And then I was like, well, what else is there? And I started to practice different things. And over the years, I've been exposed to so many modalities, so many philosophies and so on, whether it's Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, all these different schools of thoughts. And I've really integrated them to create what I call the dice system or the cube system. And why? Because it has 6 sides or dimensions. And those are the pillars of my system, and they revolve around, first, the spirit or the soul, or whatever term you want to use in your language that defines this essential essence, eternal essence within you. This thing that's beyond labels, time, space, gender, any idea that you can hold in your head of what this thing is not good enough to describe it. It's beyond ideas. It's beyond thought. Thought only exists on this plane here. And I'll go deeper into this later if we have time. But point being, this is the first dimension. The soul, the spirit, actually the driver of this vehicle called the body. Now, the next dimension is intuition, or your inner compass that guides you, the truth. Intuition is about knowing truth without having to study, read, have inferences based on data and so on. Intuition taps into something much greater. All of the greatest inventors in the world have credited all their inventions to intuition, all of them. None of them take credit for themselves. You can research them and you'll see the same thing. The information came to them. Where it comes from, don't ask me. That's a whole different story. But to continue on, the next dimension is energy. And there are many different types of energy that we can work on, but the most fundamental is just the basic energy that the body uses on a daily basis, right? My book goes deeper into it, but we need energy to have sharp minds. We need energy to digest food. We need energy to excrete, to move, to sleep. Everything you do requires energy. And the more energy you have, the more vital or fulfilling or active or productive your days in life can be. Right? What's the major problem that our society has on a global scale? Energy, right? We need to find a new source of energy to drive everything. Well, what if I gave you the key so you have infinite amount of energy for at least your whole being, body, and so on, right? So the next step, we go to the mind, which is a very critical component, because if it's all between the ears, really, that's where the game happens. If you don't have your head straight, nothing is straight. I can guarantee you that.
Amen to that.
That's a critical piece of the puzzle. Then the next pillar, or the fifth pillar, is the pillar of emotions, and learning how to really, first and foremost, work with negative emotions and not be affected by them, but be able to sit with them and experience, especially as men. Because for us as men, being resilient on an emotional level is very important. Because when we are out of emotional balance, when we get angry, fearful, and so on, we tend to do very silly, selfish, and harmful things to others, which we are not proud of. So being able to manage, first and foremost, negative emotions, and especially in our modern world where we are sold this idea that life is about comfort. Life is not about comfort. If you want comfort, go and check out the people that eat regularly or comfort and convenience in McDonald's. Their outcomes are not great. I'll guarantee you that.
True.
And the final step is the body, or the vehicle that allows us to have this experience. So how to fine-tune this vehicle, how to set it up in a way where it works in its best, to understand what works, what doesn't, based on evolutionary biology, what it's designed to do, right? What environment it's designed to do, how it would react to the stimuli in the environment, and what you can do to fine-tune it so you can extract the best performance.
Yeah, these are great pillars that you've put out here, and it sounds like that you've developed. Of course, for my audience, Martin has written a book called Men's Ultimate Guide to Holistic Well-Being, which I'm sure some of the things he's talking about right now are in his book. Tell us a little bit more about your book, because it's coming. It's not quite out yet, is it?
Yes. The book is coming very soon. You can find more information by going to superbfreegift.com, but the book title actually is Superb, Men's Ultimate Guide to Holistic Well-Being. And in my book, I'm sharing all these methodologies and ways you can really optimize your existence and build a solid base that will allow you to really realize the latent potential within you. Because I want to share a story with the audience. Long time ago, there was a pregnant lioness that was very hungry, going through the prairie in the African jungle. And she was very late in her pregnancy and tired and just barely walking and just wishing that she'll find some good prey to eat. So all of a sudden, she stumbled upon this little flock of sheep. And there was a tiny little sheep that was kind of like easy to grab because she was barely making her way. So she jumped and gave it all her energy she got. And while jumping and giving all this strength to grab the little sheep, at that very moment, from the stress and the exertion, she gave birth to a tiny little male lion, but never noticed it because she was so hungry and so caught up in this moment. So she took the little sheep, went away, and never even noticed that she lay behind a little baby lion. Well, years later, there was all the shepherds and the village people knew that there was a huge, amazing lion roaming with all these sheep. And it was doing the same things. It was running with the sheep when a predator came by. It was bleeding with them, bear, bear. And one day, another male lion who was very hungry stumbled upon the flock of sheep that this lion was part of. And it was like, am I going nuts here? Like, there's a big lion hanging out with the sheep, and the sheep, like, they accept him like he's one of them. They're not scared of him. What's going on here? That doesn't even make sense. So he observed it. He got really interested and curious what was happening here. This you don't see this in anywhere he was, been through. So he jumped. He ran after the flock of sheep, and all the sheep ran. This lion, the other lion, he was so fearful. He closed his eyes and he was crying and saying like, "Oh, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. I'm a little sheep. I'm a little sheep. I'm a little sheep." And he's like, hey, he should come up. Hey, wake up. Hey, what are you talking about? You're a sheep? So he pulled them up to the river and showed his face in the water. And he said, "Hey, look at this face now. This face roars." So this is what I want to leave you with. This is the point I want to leave you with. It's a very important point. There is a lion within you that you don't even know exists yet. If you tap into that place, your life will change dramatically. And this is what my book is really about, to show you how you can connect to the lion within, because this is a game changer. When you reach that state, when you know what the self is, the soul is, or whatever term you want to use, then you can stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds, because you can see what this world is all about, and you understand how to play the game of life and graduate from Earth School.
That's a great story, Martin. Is that story in your book?
Yes, it's got to be part of it, because it's a very powerful story that kind of like conveys what's going on. We all really, the metaphor here is that we all brought into this, what I call cult of mediocrity. From here on, I want you to create this note in your mind. Society is the cult of mediocrity. Everything that is propagated on popular media, everything that you're going to find mainstream is mediocrity. Because it's not about excellence. It's not about excelling. The only thing they want you to excel in is make more money to buy more things that you don't need, because they're never going to give you what you're looking for. This thing that you're looking for exists only within you. You can never find it out there, because there is no out there. The only out there that you perceive happens in your head. That's why the head is key, right, to how we play and navigate this game.
This society has been teaching for quite some time that everybody gets the trophy. And, as an educator, all of a sudden this changed 10 years, 15 years ago, that people started complaining when their kids didn't get a trophy, when they didn't get the top award. Like, being a musician, somebody that's been in the musical world, there are right notes and wrong notes, correct? If you play the wrong note and somebody beside you plays the right note, it's going to sound wrong. But yet we're going to get the same trophy. There's a problem with that, and that's what you're talking about. It's the mediocrity of society, and it's been down in the younger kids, where everybody, whether they're playing a sport, whether they're playing music, whatever, they're all getting the same trophy, and that just doesn't work. It creates mediocrity. The people that used to work so hard to get good grades or to get the top awards, it doesn't matter anymore. They don't even have salutatorian and valedictorian in schools anymore. So your grade point average really doesn't play into, and the mentality that creates, I'm afraid, is that, well, why work so hard? Why work to get that? So everybody's going to get it anyway. So you're right on target with everything you're talking about. Hey, you've made some really great points for our listeners. Because I like to try to keep our podcast within a certain time frame. And we're going to have to visit again, Martin, and expand more on what you're all about, because I really like a lot of things that I've heard. Give me 2 points for our listeners today that would be of great value to the people that listen to this, whether male or female. What are 2 good points that you have ascertained over the course of your time in life?
Well, first and foremost, if you read something, whatever it is that you resonate with, and when I mean read something, anything that sounds like a reasonable, logical, and valid advice or anything like that, don't just stay with being okay with reading and knowing about it. That's not going to give you results. Go and put it into practice. It's not about what you know, but what you do with what you know.
There you go. Good point.
And second of all, as I already alluded earlier, this is very important. Become very aware, or make an effort to become aware from a moment-to-moment perspective, especially if you're a parent or a figure that young children and teenagers look up to, for you to be the example that you want these kids to follow. Not what you said, but how you are, how you communicate, the things you say, the ideas you share, the way you are in your behavior, because this is what really matters. And at the end of the day, we can only be an example. We cannot force people to think in a certain way or do other things, which is why we have these conflicts nowadays, whether it's politically or religiously or whatever throughout the world, because everybody thinks that they know, they figure out the one size fits all, and now they try to give it like fit everybody in their own little box. But that's not how it works. You can only be an example. And if we look up to all the great saints or people from the past that people mention nowadays with awe and like, wow, this person was amazing. They weren't like rich in the sense of like billionaires or like successful entrepreneurs. They were people that actually were living the values that they had. They were exuding these things, not by saying them, they were doing these things. Jesus is a great example of that. Whether or not his story is true or not, that doesn't matter. But being the example, this is critical, because you can say a lot of things, but one thing I learned when I was a kid growing up in the environment that I mentioned originally in my growing up story is that people are very hypocritical. They say a lot of things, but what matters is what people say. What people do, not what they say, because it's very easy to say a lot of things, but what you do is where it counts.
I agree with you. That resonates, whether it's Jesus Christ or Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King. If you look at those figures, and even though all 3 of them talked, they spoke, they said certain words, it's the things they did. It's how they lived their life. It's the fact that out of all 3 of those that I just mentioned, I doubt any of them were wealthy by the standards that we use in our world today. Like, we listen more to a billionaire because they've made $1 billion, regardless if they live a really cruddy life. And all the things that they do, they show us, is really not positive. It's really downtrodden. And I really appreciate you saying that, Martin. And now I'm 66. Do you mind sharing how old you are?
I'm just turned out to be 39, but that's how, chronologically speaking, how old.
You don't look 39.
Chronologically speaking. However, in my mind, I've set a consistent state. This is 16 years old. I still use it as it was when I was 16. I haven't changed anything about it. And this is how it is. It's all in your head. Age is something that people want you to buy into. Because again, they can sell you a lot of things because they can convince you that you're now old and you need to do certain things. Don't listen to what people's. And when I say people, specific entities with economic agenda behind it to sell you products, services, and so on and so on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. So, man, this has been great having a conversation with you. To our listeners, I'm going to set up another podcast maybe in another couple of months with Martin and let him expand more on what he's doing, and maybe Do you think your book will be out by then?
Possibly not. I'm still working on some different little elements.
Okay.
There's a lot of projects that I'm dribbling. The book is there. It's gonna come out. I guess connecting even more dots so I can, because
Sure.
I've already written the book. It was the first version, but now I want to modify it and target it better and like just use a better language. So it's, let's put it this way. It'll be easier for the readers, for everybody who picks it up. I highly recommend that you do, but to really put things into practice, right? And to make it very, very practical. And at the end of the day, it's the results that you're going to get and the example that you can be in your family, in your community, and then whatever other way you can be a great example and inspire, empower, and educate others to be the best versions of themselves. And with that being said, I highly recommend, I definitely would love to continue our conversation and expand. I highly recommend everybody go to superbfreegift.com and just check out what the book is about and sign up, because I have a very special bonus that I'm giving away right now with the pre-orders of the book. For everybody who pre-orders the book, I'm going to actually include you for free in an online 1 month long life coaching program with me, where we're going to sit down and really practice all the different modalities so you can really put into practice what the book speaks about. So you can, for $30, that's like a no-brainer deal.
Yeah, I already filled out that form after our first conversation, so I'm looking forward to that. Looks like we've frozen up there, Martin.
Maybe, my camera. It's possible. Yeah.
So tell our audience how they can get in touch with you. What's the best way? A website, email, phone number, pigeon, whatever.
Sure. Yeah. The best way to look up my work is just go to my website, which is martinchristof.com. And it's right here.
Spell that for us, if you would.
It's martinchristof.com. And all the information is there, like how I could be of service to you, about my book, and all the other channels and so on, social media. I'm actually starting a very interesting channel coming up soon on YouTube, where I'll be sharing like long format videos, what I call cigars and wisdom, because I like to smoke cigars and to just talk and expand on a lot of these subjects that it's easy to, it's easy to generalize, but there's a lot of distinctions and important details.
I noticed your gentleman's club that you have, where you have the cigar side and then you have the motorcycle riders. And I was a Harley rider for many years. In fact, I just recently sold my motorcycle. But when I saw that, I was like, man, I wish I lived out in California. I'd get a bike again, and we'd hook up and go start riding and talk about things and coaching and all that. But folks, I really recommend you check out Martin. I've been looking at all his material. We've talked, and we're going to continue talking. I think he's on the right track with this holistic well-being approach, especially for men that are, I think there's a lot of men out here searching for something. And one of the things that I know personally, that after I had my stroke 7 years ago, it really changed my thought process. And, what was I all about? And what was I pushing so hard for that got me to that point? And I've really done a major turnaround to where I am more holistic in my thought process, in my physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, you name it. So that really is my philosophy too. And I look forward to learning more and more from people like you, Martin, and others that I've started meeting and greeting with my podcast. But we're going to sign off today, folks. You can get this information that Martin has shared. I will also have it posted on the podcast, so it'll be written out for you, and some of the comments that Martin has left with us today will be available. But thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you, Martin, for being a guest with us today. And we ask that you'll come back and visit us at the Bob Priest Show Life podcast in the near future. Any last comments before I let you go, Martin?
It was a great pleasure, and thank you everybody for listening. Hopefully, you're gonna get put into practice some of the ideas I shared, and look up the books and purchase my book, because that's probably gonna be the best decision you're ever gonna make in the upcoming days. So I highly recommend doing that. And thank you again, Bob. It's been absolutely wonderful to be your guest and share some tiny bits of what else I got to share and love to share with others.
There's a lot to unpack here, so we'll definitely do some more of it. Folks, have a great day out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Hey everyone, thanks again for checking into today's episode. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, Apple, leave me a 5-star rating if you so choose. And if you enjoyed the show, I'm so grateful that you're spending some time with us and listening to our podcast. If you need to get in touch with me to learn more about my passion to inform and educate about alternative methods and modalities of healing, you can go to www.bobpriest.life. That's BOBPRIEST.life. While there, check out a blog or two and listen to other podcast sessions that I've had in the past. Guys, have a great day, and thank you so much for joining in.